Assalamualaikum to everyone. Today we learn a famous person. And today we learn about Jackie Robinson. Let's get started.
Alright guys, based on the timestamps behind the photos, here is the order. Backpack,
If you know this, if you forgot, if you listen up.
if you've got
Safe? Are you even paying attention? She was out. That's gotta be the worst call I've ever seen. Oh. Huh. I guess she was safe then. Sorry about that, everybody. Dear Tim and Moby, who was Jackie Robinson? From Jose. Jackie Robinson was one of the most famous baseball players of all time. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers from 1947 to 1956. He broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. In the 19th century, the team owners decided they wanted Major League Baseball to be all white. Since they were banned from the majors, black players created the Negro Leagues, all-black professional baseball teams. Technically, there wasn't an official rule excluding African Americans. But the unofficial color barrier may as well have been a law. America was a segregated country back then. In many places, African Americans weren't allowed to mix with white people. They were treated like second-class citizens in pretty much every way. But after World War II, the civil rights movement challenged the racist system, and attitudes slowly began to change. Yeah, it was about time. A man named Branch Rickey agreed. Rickey ran the Brooklyn Dodgers, a professional baseball team in New York City. Rickey had been personally opposed to segregation for a long time. He also realized that there were a ton of talented stars in the Negro Leagues. He knew these players could help the Dodgers win. In October 1945, he signed a 26-year-old infielder named Jackie Robinson. Robinson had gone to college at UCLA, where he'd been a star in 4 sports: baseball, basketball, football, and track. He was a great athlete, but that's not the only reason Rickey signed him. He knew Robinson's character would serve him well in the challenges to come. There was no doubt that he would face tremendous abuse from racist players and fans. Rickey believed Robinson had the strength to control his emotions and not respond to the insults. When Jackie took the field, baseball would become one of the first areas of American life to integrate. Schools, restaurants, and even the armed forces were still segregated. After a year in the minor leagues, Jackie Robinson made his debut for the Dodgers on April 15th, 1947. Yeah, it was incredibly tough. Fans in other cities, and even players on opposing teams, would yell horrible, abusive things at him. Pitchers would try to hit him, and runners would spike him with their cleats. He even got death threats. But Jackie stayed calm and let his game do the talking. That year, he hit an impressive .297 batting average and scored 125 runs. He led the league in stolen bases and was named Rookie of the Year. Over the next few seasons, the Dodgers became the best team in the National League, and Robinson became a superstar. People of all races admired his courage, and Dodgers fans loved his intensity, skill, and desire to win. The most exciting part of his game was his base running. His speed and daring on the base paths were legendary. You don't have to make the call. That game took place more than 50 years ago. Jackie Robinson retired from baseball in 1956 at age 37. By then, most teams had integrated. Ball players of all races were playing side by side. At the same time, the civil rights movement was slowly ending segregation throughout America. And a new generation of African American stars, led by Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, was taking the baseball world by storm. Jackie Robinson became the first African American inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame. He died in 1972 at the age of 53. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of his debut, Major League Baseball honored Robinson. His number, 42, was permanently retired by every Major League team. No other baseball player has ever been honored in that way, before or since. No, I don't think being the first robot umpire will get you into the Hall of Fame. And, this isn't exactly the majors.
The next thing we're gonna know is the weather. Let's get started. Let's get started with the weather time.
Hey, you ready? The sky is totally clear. Look outside. Alright, but you were the one who was all into the idea of getting buried in the sand. Dear Tim and Moby, what are natural disasters and how do they happen? From Maritza. Well, that's a good question. Moby's claiming that a hurricane will ruin our beach day, but... Alright. Natural disasters happen for different reasons. Some are weather-related, like hurricanes. These tropical storms form over the ocean, picking up speed and strength as they move over the water. If a hurricane hits land, its high winds and heavy rain can cause a lot of damage. Thunderstorms are a lot more common than hurricanes. The thunder can't hurt you, but lightning is a powerful form of electrical energy that you want to stay away from. I think we're pretty safe from lightning in the house. Tornadoes are the most violent storms that nature sends our way.
With rotating funnel-shaped clouds and winds reaching 300 miles per hour, tornadoes can do a lot of damage to large areas.
Winter storms bring snow, freezing rain, sleet, and temperatures that make you want to run indoors. They can cause icy conditions on roads, fallen power lines, and extreme cold.
Right. Floods happen when land is covered in more water than it can absorb. Lots of things can bring about floods, including heavy rain, overflowing rivers, and even melting snow.
A flood can mean a few inches of water in the basement or an entire house washed over. It's sort of the opposite of a drought, when there's not enough water.
Droughts are slower to develop, but the lack of water can devastate entire ecosystems. It is scary to think about. Sometimes these disasters can be predicted, giving people enough time to relocate.
But there are also times when these things catch us off guard or are more powerful than people expect.
Earthquakes are especially unpredictable. They happen along plate boundaries in the Earth's crust. When plates shift, the Earth shakes.
Well, earthquakes vary in intensity, so you can't always feel them. Depending on how strong an earthquake is, it can cause a lot of damage or very little.
When an earthquake occurs underwater, it can trigger a tsunami. These massive waves can travel as fast as 500 miles an hour. When they hit land, they can bring a lot of destruction. Some tsunamis are caused by underwater volcanoes, eruptions of hot molten rock from deep inside the Earth. Volcanoes are linked to plate activity too. When they erupt on land, their ash plumes and lava flows can do a lot of damage. Yeah, they can start wildfires, but those are more often caused by people or lightning. Wildfires happen a lot in dry areas. They move fast and are difficult to put out, especially if it's windy.
Huh. I get what you're saying. These are natural disasters, and it may seem a little like the Earth is trying to kill us, but this is just the way the planet operates. Our planet has a lot of water on it, and it's constantly in motion, and that means droughts in one area and storms in another. Likewise, the Earth is very active geologically, and pressure from moving tectonic plates has to be released somewhere.
Of course, none of that makes natural disasters any less scary. But we are getting better all the time at predicting these events.
And governments and humanitarian agencies do a lot to help out whenever disaster strikes. At home, the
can devastate entire ecosystems. It is scary to think about. Sometimes these disasters can be predicted, giving people enough time to relocate.
But there are also times when these things catch us off guard or are more powerful than people expect.
Earthquakes are especially unpredictable. They happen along plate boundaries in the Earth's crust. When plates shift, the Earth shakes.
Well, earthquakes vary in intensity, so you can't always feel them. Depending on how strong an earthquake is, it can cause a lot of damage or very little.
When an earthquake occurs underwater, it can trigger a tsunami. These massive waves can travel as fast as 500 miles an hour. When they hit land, they can bring a lot of destruction. Some tsunamis are caused by underwater volcanoes, eruptions of hot molten rock from deep inside the Earth. Volcanoes are linked to plate activity too. When they erupt on land, their ash plumes and lava flows can do a lot of damage. Yeah, they can start wildfires, but those are more often caused by people or lightning. Wildfires happen a lot in dry areas. They move fast and are difficult to put out, especially if it's windy.
Huh. I get what you're saying. These are natural disasters, and it may seem a little like the Earth is trying to kill us, but this is just the way the planet operates. Our planet has a lot of water on it, and it's constantly in motion, and that means droughts in one area and storms in another. Likewise, the Earth is very active geologically, and pressure from moving tectonic plates has to be released somewhere.
Of course, none of that makes natural disasters any less scary. But we are getting better all the time at predicting these events.
And governments and humanitarian agencies do a lot to help out whenever disaster strikes. At home, the best thing you can do is to make a family plan so that everyone in your family knows how to reach one another and where to go in case of an emergency.
And make sure you have a ready kit of basic supplies you'll need in an emergency.
Okay, right now I really want to go to the beach. Well, you can't always believe what the weather reports. But I guess it's always good to listen.
Hey guys, do you hear me? The human that is recording is dumb.
The next thing you're gonna learn is the color. Let's get started.
No, we're not learning colors.
Let's get started.
I'm making a Freedom Day poster. Dear Tim and Moby, what is apartheid? From Audrey. Apartheid was South Africa's policy of racial discrimination from 1948 to 19...
We have 0 subscribers.
Let's get started.
And don't ever subscribe to
Tuning on the colors.
Chicken mushroom.
Subscribe to FBKT Bird.
Dear Tim and Moby, what is the electromagnetic spectrum? Signed, Winston. The electromagnetic spectrum is just the name for a bunch of types of radiation, organized by the amounts of energy they carry. No, it doesn't have to be from radioactive material like plutonium necessarily. Radiation is any movement of energy through space. You can think of this radiation as a wave made up of moving electrical and magnetic fields, or you can think of it as a stream of particles called photons. EM radiation is kind of indecisive. Sometimes it behaves like a wave, sometimes like particles. Starting with the lowest energy level, the 7 types of EM radiation are radio waves, microwaves, infrared light, visible light, ultraviolet light, X-rays, and gamma rays. Radio waves are used to transmit radio and television signals. AM radio uses low energy waves, FM radio uses medium energy waves, and TV uses high energy waves. Cell phones use radio waves too, and stars in space can also emit radio waves. Microwaves are used in microwave ovens and airplane radar systems. In the oven, microwaves heat up the water molecules in your food. With radar, microwaves are reflected off an airplane and sent back to the radar system to pinpoint the exact location of the plane. Infrared rays are often produced when an object radiates heat. You can't see them, but you do feel them. A remote control uses infrared rays to send signals to your TV set, stereo, or DVD player. Infrared radiation can also be used to take special photographs called thermographs. The next type of radiation in the spectrum is visible light. Thanks to special cells called cones, our eyes can perceive wavelengths of visible light as color. In order from lowest to highest energy, the colors are known as red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Ultraviolet rays occur naturally in sunlight. Fortunately, the ozone layer blocks most UV radiation from reaching the surface of the Earth. In large doses, UV rays can cause skin cancer and cataracts. X-rays have a very high penetrating power. That means they can travel easily through just about anything. Doctors use small doses of them to make pictures of your bones and organs and stuff. The X-rays travel more easily through flesh than bone, and that's why shining X-rays through someone onto sensitive film can make an image of your insides. Gamma rays are the most energetic waves in the EM spectrum. Most gamma rays coming from space are absorbed by our atmosphere. But gamma rays are also produced on Earth in high-energy reactions, such as nuclear explosions. Gamma rays do a lot of damage when they pass through living cells. Where does the radiation come from? Well, all matter is made up of atoms, and each atom is made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Electrons orbit around the proton and neutron nucleus at different levels, or shells, depending on how much energy they have. Sometimes an electron drops from one energy level to another, giving off energy in the form of electromagnetic radiation. The sun, Earth, and stars all radiate electromagnetic energy of varying strengths. All electromagnetic radiation moves through the universe at a constant speed of 300,000 kilometers per second. EM radiation can even travel through the empty vacuum of outer space. The higher the energy of the wave, the more stuff it tends to pass through. Ugh, my soup's cold. Thanks. I was kind of afraid you were going to nuke it. No, I meant literally.
The next thing we gotta learn is the next thing we're gonna learn is
Arr, matey, 'twas a fine time trick-or-treating this year. Yar, and now let's count. Arr, matey, 'twas a fine time trick-or-treating this year. Yar, and now let's count up the booty. 'Tis a king's ransom in chocolate and sugar. Now pour out your treasury, a salty dog, and let's eat. Wow. Dear Tim and Moby, why do we have Halloween? Sincerely, Michael. Hey, Michael. Halloween has kind of a long and interesting history. It begins more than 2,000 years ago in ancient Britain and Ireland. Back then, the land belonged to a group of people called the Celts. November 1st was an important holiday for the Celts. It marked the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. To celebrate, they had a giant festival that began on the night of October 31st. It was called Samhain. Yeah, I know, it's spelled differently than how it's pronounced. When did you become such a stickler? During Samhain, the Celts would light bonfires and sacrifice crops and livestock to their gods. They would dress up in animal skins and hides during the festivities. The Celts believed that the ghosts of the dead, along with fairies, goblins, and other supernatural beings, roamed the earth during Samhain. These beings could cause a lot of trouble. To keep them at bay, people would leave food for them outside their houses. Well, during the 1st century CE, the Romans conquered Britain. Over the next few centuries, 2 Roman holidays became combined with Samhain. First, there was Feralia, which honored the dead. And then there was the Feast of Pomona, which honored the goddess of fruit orchards and the harvest. Well, Pomona's symbol was an apple, so some historians believe that the tradition of bobbing for apples began with her festival. Anyway, in the 4th and 5th century, Christianity reached the British Isles. The Celts and the other people that lived there all converted, but in many places the old holidays were still celebrated. To get them to stop, the Pope replaced Samhain with Christian holidays. November 2nd became All Souls' Day, a day to remember the souls of the dead. November 1st became All Saints' Day, a day honoring Christian martyrs. And October 31st was All Hallows' Eve, which was shortened to Halloween. Well, Hallows is Old English for saints, and Ean means evening, so Halloween literally means the evening before All Saints' Day. The traditions we associate with Halloween gradually evolved over the centuries. By medieval times, the tradition of leaving food out for the dead had evolved into a ritual called souling. Beggars would go from door to door at Halloween time. They would promise to pray for the souls of people's dead relatives. In return, they'd receive some food. That's probably how trick-or-treating began. In Ireland, people began dressing up as ghosts and goblins in order to blend in with the supernatural creatures that wandered the earth on Halloween. They also began carving scary faces onto turnips, gourds, and potatoes. They'd place them in windows or near doors to keep these beings away from their homes. That's how the tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns got started. When people from Scotland and Ireland immigrated to America, they brought their traditions with them. They caught on, and pretty soon kids across the country were making mischief and trick-or-treating on Halloween night. What do you mean I'm making Halloween boring? You want it to be more scary, huh? Alright, how's this? Happy Halloween, everybody!
The next thing we're gonna know is we continue learning the government rule. Let's get started.
How many times do I have to tell you? This is an original copy of the Constitution. You can't borrow it with your library card. Dear Tim and Moby, why do they call the Constitution a living document? Thanks, Selma. Great question, Selma.
Let's continue.
How many times do I have to tell you? This is an original copy of the Constitution. You can't borrow it with your library card. Dear Tim and Moby, why do they call the Constitution a living document? Thanks, Selma. Great question, Selma. You've probably heard all about what an amazing document the U.S. Constitution is. How it's a blueprint for our federal government. How it unified 13 states into one nation. And how it's lasted more than 200 years through hard times and even a civil war. All that is true enough, but it can give you the wrong idea. Well, like that the Constitution is some sacred text. Or that the framers, the guys who wrote the thing, all agreed with each other. Or that we're meant to follow its rules exactly as they wrote them forever. This point of view ignores the real story of how the Constitution was born. It was May of 1787 in Philadelphia. Political leaders from around the nation were gathering to discuss changes to the Articles of Confederation. That was America's first constitution, written in 1776. The Articles had been created almost as an afterthought to the Declaration of Independence. To wage war on England, the newly independent states needed to coordinate with each other. But they didn't want to give away too much of their own power. So the Articles established a weak national Congress where each state got one vote. All it could really do was declare war and manage foreign affairs. Once the war had been won in 1783, things began falling apart. America had borrowed enormous sums of money to finance the war. Now those bills were coming due. The Confederation Congress didn't have taxing power, so it couldn't raise money to pay the debts back. Individual states owed money too. All of that debt was dragging down the economy, and things were starting to get ugly. Rhode Island had basically declared that neither it nor its citizens would be paying their debts back. And in 1786, there was a tax revolt in Massachusetts. Shays' rebellion lasted for months, and there was nothing the Articles Congress could do about it. Eventually, a local militia managed to put it down. But it was a wake-up call for the country. If America couldn't pay off its debts, no one would do business with it. And if it couldn't keep the peace, how would it defend its own borders? Everyone going to the Philadelphia Convention saw the need for a stronger central government. But just how strong was a matter of fierce debate. 55 delegates from 12 states met over the course of that summer to decide. They elected George Washington to preside since he was the most trusted among them. Despite the heat, they kept the windows shut and the drapes drawn. Because if the public knew what they were planning, it might have triggered another rebellion. James Madison set the tone for the convention with a bold plan. Instead of just fixing the Articles of Confederation, he proposed scrapping it entirely. His Virginia plan called for a government composed of a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. Yep, just like today, and his legislature even had 2 houses. The government would have authority over anything the states couldn't handle themselves. It could also veto any state laws it didn't like. So, a strong national government overseeing weaker states. Yep, pretty much the exact opposite of the Articles. Madison's plan scared some delegates, but just as many were frightened by the economic slump. They were wealthy men who tended to favor a powerful government. It would stabilize the judicial branch.
Hold up, I'll be right back. Hold up. Hold up. No, what? This is review for you. This is for a 3rd grader.
I don't care.
What do you mean I don't care? You do care. Second, this is physics.
Yeah, you better write down external vote, then,
You know they can't hear you.
and legislative and judicial.
Shut up, ugly.
Yes! Oh, did you hear that? That's why this mommy in the video.
Let's get started. Hold up.
No, this you left.
Yep, just like today, and his legislature even had 2 houses. The government would have authority over anything the states couldn't handle themselves. It could also veto any state laws it didn't like. So, a strong national government overseeing weaker states. Yep, pretty much the exact opposite of the Articles. Madison's plan scared some delegates, but just as many were frightened by the economic slump. They were wealthy men who tended to favor a powerful government. It would stabilize the economy, which would benefit their businesses. The Virginia plan also called for proportional representation in both houses of Congress. States with more people got more representatives in each house. That way, instead of states getting decision-making power over the country's direction, the people would. Nope, delegates from small states weren't too keen on that idea. They knew Madison's plan would give them less power than the Articles government. Led by William Patterson, they proposed the New Jersey Plan. It kept the Confederation Congress intact, but gave representation in both houses of Congress. States with more people got more representatives in each house. That way, instead of states getting decision-making power over the country's direction, the people would. Nope, delegates from small states weren't too keen on that idea. They knew Madison's plan would give them less power than the Articles government. Led by William Patterson,
Advice is me. Let's write it together. Get pause this video and get a pencil or and a notebook too. We sort of taking notes. What do you mean so far?
proposed the New Jersey Plan. It kept the Confederation Congress intact, but gave new powers like collecting taxes. Like the Virginia Plan, it called for an executive and judicial branch. Right, the legislature was the biggest difference between the two plans. Which should be represented, states or people? The delegates argued this point into July, keeping the windows closed through a brutal heat wave. Opponents of Madison's plan said it was illegal. The convention didn't have the authority to create a new government. It seemed that there was no middle ground, and the convention would be a failure. Finally, Roger Sherman put forward the Connecticut Compromise, or Great Compromise. It gave each state 2 representatives in the Senate, and proportional representation in the House of Representatives. Yeah, it may seem obvious to you, but this was a new thing back then. Anyway, the question of representation raised another thorny issue: slavery. Southern states knew they'd be outnumbered in the House of Representatives, and a northern majority might push through legislation outlawing slavery. To boost their power in the House, Southern delegates proposed that slaves count toward the number of representatives they got. Northerners didn't think it was fair to count people who wouldn't even be allowed to vote. And secretly, abolitionists like Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton probably did want to outlaw the slave trade. Yeah, plenty of people back then were opposed to slavery. Even Madison, a slave owner, called it a barbarous practice. But if Southern delegates walked out of the convention, it would have spelled the end of the United States. Again, a last-minute settlement was reached, the 3/5 Compromise. For the purposes of representation, states could count 3/5 of their slaves. And Congress was barred from making any laws about slavery for 20 years. Well, that's my point. The framers were smart guys, but they were far from perfect. Most of them were just trying to protect the interests of the people they represented. The document they hammered together that summer wasn't perfect either. Everybody was equally dissatisfied with it. But the framers understood that no single document would settle their arguments. That wasn't the purpose of the U.S. Constitution. Its purpose was to keep those arguments going. If you think about it, that's all our government is, a 200-year-old debate about how to run the country. That's why the framers included a way to add amendments or changes to the Constitution. In fact, the nation added 10 amendments before every state had even adopted it. These are known as the Bill of Rights. Since then, we've added 17 more. Some of them actually reverse rules from the original document. So when we say the Constitution is alive, we mean that it changes with the times. And that's definitely a good thing. Don't even think about it.
The next thing we're gonna learn is William. Let's get started. A person named William. Let's get started.
هذا توقع مرقدنا قد الشارع هو في هذا السوق هذا ده السوق
Let's get started.
Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader. Your sad line. Oh, right. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes or given you clairvoyance enough to find the rebels hidden for... Thanks. Dear Tim and Moby, who was William Shakespeare? From Aaron. William Shakespeare was one of the greatest writers in the history of the...
How did he do?
Today we're learning a computer history. Let's get started.
And don't ever speak to me. What do you want from me? I'm not farting.
That's the job to make. That's the $10 spoon.
What do you want? Jacket? Yeah. Bye. This is the last time I'm talking.
Little joke. Grandma. Dear Tim and Moby, I would like to know about the history of computers.
ده فقطعنا يا دوب انت مطيرين معاك فوق ده انا حسيت
You might be surprised at how far back the history of computers goes. It starts thousands of years ago with the invention of the first devices for storing numbers. We don't need to go that far back. That's better. People use mechanical...
انتوا بكلم انا يا انت يكون نقص
Let's continue. We're learning
انت انا ما في الوريات
computer history. Let's get
Hey,
started.
what's your grandma doing here? Little joke.
He's done written. I said it and it is.
Dear Tim and Moby, I would like to know about the history of computers. Thank you, Serena. Hey there. You might be surprised at how far back the history of computers goes. It starts thousands of years ago with the invention of the first devices for storing numbers. We don't need to go that far back. That's better. People have used mechanical calculators like the abacus since ancient times. Greek astronomers took it a step further with precision instruments that track the stars. These devices are the distant ancestors of the central processing unit, the heart, brain of the modern computer. A CPU can perform millions of calculations per second. So how did we get from there to here? Well, sure, electricity was important.
Okay, here.
But the modern computing age began with mechanical devices built by a 19th century British mathematician named Charles Babbage. Babbage's machines used gears to store numbers into complex math. He
Yeah.
designed one that could read punch cards
This
to do
has to
different
be a-
calculations.
Oh, yo.
He made
This
it
doesn't have any
programmable.
khakis.
His colleague, Ada Lovelace, demonstrated
Give
that
me a
with the
moment.
world's first computer programs.
Yeah,
Decades
give
later,
me.
American inventor Herman
No,
Muller
no,
built a
you-
computer to help count the 1890 census. Like Babbage's machines, it used punch cards and gears that were driven by
Why are you
electricity.
talking to me right now?
Businesses used Hollerith's machine to track all sorts of stuff, and his company grew into the biggest computer maker in the world, IBM. The problem was, these early computers all had to be custom built. Well, like you couldn't program a census machine to keep track of train schedules. That began to change 50 years later as European nations and America prepared for World War II. High-powered machines were needed for all kinds of jobs, from weapons targeting to decoding secret messages. So governments raced to
build a whole new generation of computers. Instead of gears, these machines used electricity to represent numbers and operations. Well, the simplest way is with an electric switch. On means 1 and off means 0. Strings of ones and zeros, or binary code, can represent words, numbers, and even sounds and images. For example, here's one way to represent Tim's in binary. Electricity could also be amplified or boosted to represent different math operations. Now imagine thousands of switches and amplifiers all hooked up together. Yep, then you could perform super complex calculations and way faster than any mechanical device. During World War II, Britain's Colossus relied on 2,000 switches and amplifiers to decode enemy messages. America's ENIAC had almost 10 times that, allowing it to run 5,000 calculations per second. Yep, by today's standards, these room-sized machines are pretty clunky, but their use of electric switches was revolutionary. The biggest advances since then have really just been refinements of that basic design. First, the transistor was invented shortly after the war. A transistor is a switch that's smaller, faster, and more reliable than the glass tube from before. Next, microprocessors put many transistors onto a single chip. The number of transistors that could fit grew every year. By the late 1960s, one tiny processor could do the work of Colossus and ENIAC combined. Still, computers weren't something the average person ever used. They were for the same people who'd been using them since the 19th century: government agencies, businesses, and researchers. Then, in the 1970s, two guys from California set out to bring computers to the masses. Their names were Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Working out of Jobs' garage, they completed the Apple I in 1976. It let users see what they were doing on a TV screen when most computers didn't have screens at all. Anyone could start it up, and it had a drive that let you save and load all sorts of different programs. An improved version, the Apple II, sold millions of units. By the early 80s, other companies were getting into the act, and the home computer market was booming. Software from games to word processors gave everyone in the family something to do. As the internet grew more popular in the 1990s, email and websites made the machines even more useful. So did touchscreens, which let you control your device with simple gestures. Yep, these days, there are little computers in every room of the house. Today's processors cram millions of transistors onto a single chip. Chances are, your phone is a computer that's way more powerful than one of those machines from the 1980s. Hey, what are you doing? Let me out of here.
Oh! He got a good
Come on now, joke's over. I'm sorry about that grandma crack.
The next thing we're gonna do is to learn about the computer history. Let's get started. Now we've got school. Let's get started.
Dad, have you been standing here all night? Uh-oh, were you dividing by 0 again? Dear Tim and Moby, what is computer programming? Thanks, Amy. You picked a good time to ask. Moby zapped his operations chip and he can't seem to do anything. Right, buddy? Don't worry, I've got you covered. We'll just switch you over to voice command. There. Now I can program you until your replacement chip arrives. I know, your brain is no ordinary computer. But it does have some things in common with what most people use. Computers can do all sorts of amazing things, from navigating the internet to piloting an airplane. But they can't do anything at all without a set of instructions. That's all a computer program is, a series of steps that a computer can follow. And somebody has to write those steps. Unlike you, computers can't really understand English. So programmers have to write their instructions in special languages. That's called coding, and the lines of instructions are known as code. There are literally hundreds of different languages. Thankfully, you don't need to know any of them to understand some programming basics. Just follow along as I code Moby. Okay, Moby, walk to the counter. Alright, sorry about that. I have to remember that programs need to be really specific. They have to be step-by-step ordered instructions, an algorithm. That's why so many programming tools automatically number your lines of code. Let's try it. Moby, first lift your right foot, then move it ahead of your left foot, then put it down. Great! Let's call those 3 lines step right and save it as a function. That's like a mini program we can call on whenever we want. Now, let's make an identical step function for the left foot. Moby, step left, then step right. Now repeat lines 1 and 2 over and over. Repeating a section of code like this is called a loop, and it's something you can do in any programming language. Moby, stop, then walk back here, then stop. You've just been programmed. Lift your arms in triumph. Yeah, it is sort of like making a recipe. Instead of telling the computer what to do, you're telling it how to do it. Speaking of recipes, how about making a peanut butter sandwich for lunch? Moby, first, put peanut butter on 1 slice of bread, then use the knife to spread it around. Okay, keep it together. Programmers have to be patient. You have to keep refining or iterating your code until it works the way you want it to. If there's a mistake or bug, you have to find out where it is and fix it. Moby, first open the peanut butter jar, then use the knife to scoop out some peanut butter, then spread it on a slice of bread, and finally put another slice on top.
You cut this food if you have to battle happen.
That's closer, but I think I'll just get lunch at school. Hey, that reminds me, I'm late.
Yeah, he's not the same. He got zapped. Now he's going to play.
First, walk to a seat, then sit down in it. I can't take you anywhere. Here, try this. First, check if the closest seat is occupied. If no, then sit. If yes, then move on to the next seat and repeat.
Alexan?
Yep, and we got to another big part of coding.
Alexan?
Conditional statements. That's when the program looks at an unknown value or variable and does different things depending on what it is. In this case, the variable was whether the seat was empty. Moby looked at one desk, judging its condition as occupied or empty. Based on what he saw, he moved on to the next desk or sat down. In other words, he took inputs and used them to generate outputs. Right, the computers most of us use don't have fancy eye sensors like you do. Instead, they have input devices like keyboards, mice, and touchscreens. The inputs are the things you type, and the places you click or tap. And the output is how the computer processes your input.
The next thing we're gonna do
Need a
is
program to what now? Oh, Ms. Lynch, can I get a bathroom pass?
Come back, everyone. We always said, come back,
the next thing we're gonna do is just practice our driving skills. Let's get started.
Radio.
Tell us more.
Traditional marketing methods don't make the cut in today's digital world. In fact, millions of times.
Why you two have the same comment? How come?
I showed him Spanish.
Yeah.
You have to explain. Who would teach you that?
No one?
That's true?
No.
Who would teach him then?
Me? No one.
Who would teach him Spy Ninja? Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Who did that? Who did that? I don't know. It was the first video. Now it's gone. If it's that stuff, I'm changing it. What? Huh? Fire!
I so believe. What happened? Malata.
Fighting, Jeff!
It's this girl.
It's not letting me!
Wouldn't let you act here?
It's not letting me! I'm trying to exit it!
Well, you have to watch it with her. That's why she presents her screen.
Oh, I know!
I know what.
Who did this? What else? I'll smash them into pieces. I got you.
That's tough out of thing.
If it's still in. Finally, after that, finally, the thing, it was just a few minutes. Ah, what is wrong with these people? Go back to my channel. My channel.
My channel, someone else's channel.
You know what it is.
It seems.
Mana bak daha bağırıyor kuzum ağız. Nasıl kuzum ya?
When you wake up.
Ya?
When you wake up.
Bana sehre bana. Nasıl?
The
Oh ya. Ya. O şey yapar.
Dear Tim Moby, how does a car work? Sincerely, Stephen. Thanks for writing in, Stephen. Most cars are powered by an internal combustion engine. That's a machine that converts an explosion's energy into motion. The key to the internal combustion engine is something called the cylinder. Burning gasoline creates a tiny explosion inside.
Kan mana ya bang jawan ni win?
You went and father went in.
Ya.
And father went in.
Akar mana ya? Kau jangan kau ya. Nak saya ya.